An airline company paralyzing hundreds of thousands of Canadians travelers all across the globe. A postal system that is barely capable of delivering mail in a timely fashion, strikes, and unions fighting and always getting more and more for their members, obviously knowing that the population is being held hostage every time. This is the dysfunctional dichotomy of some Canadian regulated industries and crown companies and their reluctance at being fixed for the good of the people. My name is Seb, and I welcome you all to the Canadian Wilbury. Now, it all began in mid August when you have over 10,000 flight attendants from Air Canada who decided to go on strike. The problem is, well, their 10-year-old collective agreement is about to end, and so they decided to sit down at the negotiation table and they asked for a wage increase, but also to solve the problem of the unpaid time, because you see, flight attendants are only getting paid as soon as the airplane is getting airborne. As long as those wheels are touching ground, they're not getting a single penny, even though they have to perform their duties. And so the flight attendant ended up voting to go on strike with a whopping 99%, meaning basically every single one of them were really fed up with the position of the government and they ended up going on strike. When it comes to the government side, the strike was pronounced illegal by the Canada Industrial Relations Board, and this ended up creating some very, very angry reaction from the union. The union boss ended up saying that he will fight this decision of being unilaterally bring back to work, and if he has to go in jail for it, so be it. He is prepared to fight this to the bitter end. Job Minister Patty Hajdu also decided to launch an investigation, and the reason is because she ended up hearing about the complaint of those flight attendants where they have to perform their duties while the airplane is grounded, and as long as the airplane is grounded, they're not getting paid. A mediator was finally found, and the union ended up talking to this mediator because Air Canada was reluctant in going back at the negotiation table as long as the strike was going on. And so on August the 20th, finally a compromise was found. The strike was ended after 3 long days of inoperation. When it comes to the consequences of something like this, let's start with the government of Canada. The government of Canada ended up being extremely surprised, and they ended up criticizing the position of the union, especially that they never saw a union be ready to go that far and to perform jail time or being fined hundreds of thousands of dollars a day and just say, we don't care, this is like BS, we're going to fight. That was one of the critique of the government. The second thing is the minister's preoccupation about not being paid is because, and the reason as to why she decided to launch this investigation is because if you perform your duties in Canada and you're not getting paid, this is illegal. And so maybe the law has been broken. So we are going to see where this investigation, this minister investigation, is going to go. And also, funny fact, a petition was actually launched by one of the flight attendant on strike, asking the head of Minister Hajdu, and that petition ended up getting close to 30,000 names. So I don't know exactly what is going to happen now that the strike is over, but I thought that this was a funny point to mention. Now, when it comes to the side of the unions ended up declaring the exact same thing on the position of the government. The unions are getting fed up that the government is using the Canada Industrial Relations Board to declare every single one of their strike illegal and forcing the union protected workers back to work. The unions are seeing this as a lowering or degradation of the power of negotiation in this country, and they're getting pissed at this, and I can see why. Because The unions are saying since Canada ended up seeing a significant raise in inflation, those salaries have to match the raise in inflation. Hence, the reason why their demand is not that unreasonable, according to them. Of course, in this case, I'm gonna have to say that the union ended up going on strike right in the middle of August, in the middle of Canadians enjoying summer vacation. Basically, the worst time that you can actually declare a strike on something like this. When it comes to Canada Post, the portrait is not that better either. With the information that I have in hand, both the Crown and the Union are back on the negotiation table since August the 15th because the Government of Canada ended up presenting their final and most lucrative offer to the unions in May of 2025. But this final offer ended up being rejected in early August, and so now we are waiting for the union to react to this final offer. But the union obviously is accusing the Crown and the government to try to delay things as long as possible to prevent the union and the Crown that's sitting at the table and to find a satisfactory conclusion to this. The union is basically asking for a 13% pay raise over the next 4 years. They are extremely against partial timers, workers, and contractors being hired to give more flexibility to Canada Post. And so, as a way of manifesting, every single employees or the union is telling their members to do and to refuse to do any kind of overtime, further delaying mail delivery because of it. On the side of the Crown, basically Canada Post is on the verge of economical bankruptcy. This is how serious the situation really is. The negotiations have been going on for 18 months and they are still going. A very interesting things. Canada Post ended up going on strike in 2024, and the government ended up asking the Canada Industrial Relations Board to declare the strike illegal, which is exactly what ended up happening. And ever since, the Crown and the Union are met into an impasse. They cannot agree on anything. Basically, this ended up pissing off the unions, no doubt. To give you guys an idea, Canada Post ended up losing over $750 million in 2023, just to give you how dire their financial situation really is. We ended up talking about the government, we ended up talking about the unions of workers, but there is a third pillar to this equation that, in my opinion, is way too often forgotten, and that pillar is, well, you, Mr. Sucker. The clients, the people, the travelers. Let's talk about them. In the case of Air Canada, this strike, 3 days, remember, 3 days, ended up scrapping the vacation of at least 500,000 travelers across the globe. This is 130,000 of them per day, and there is no alternative because Air Canada is one of the biggest aircraft transporter of the country. So if you want to have another airplane that might end up bringing you back to Canada, you might be successful, but it is going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars, let alone 3 day strike. This might take 2 weeks to try and reprogram everything and readjust to the immense chaos that this ended up creating. So this is no joke. When it comes to Canada Post, Canada Post is hitting small and medium businesses all across the country a lot more than they are hitting people like you and me. As you can see here, during their the Canada Post strikes in 2024, the one that ended up being declared illegal, 13% of all the Canadian enterprise just ended up throwing Canada Post in the garbage and say, that's it, I'm never going to use you again. They ended up getting burned one too many times, because you see the strike of 2024 for Canada Post ended up costing small medium enterprises in Canada a whopping $75 to $100 million per per day. Imagine that sum of money day after day after day. It's costing a lot. So they ended up creating some alternatives. So we have 70% of all of these small medium enterprises who decided to switch to digital, meaning emails and stuff like that. So paper documents are no longer going to be accepted. So Canada Post won't have anything to transport anymore. 45% of all of those small medium enterprises ended up going to see another carrier, either FedEx or whatever it is, and ditch Canada Post. And then you have the latest 27% of companies in Canada that just ended up saying, you know what, fair enough, my mail is going to be late and there's nothing I can do about it. So I wanted to talk about this third pillar that is more than often way too many times forgotten, as you have the government and the union trying to fight one another. Publicly speaking, the real victims are way too often being ignored in this case. So now, far from me the idea of trying to play the blaming game in here, but we're gonna have to have a little talk about this all, because when you have a strike that is being declared illegal, when I'm looking at the government in both Canada Post and Air Canada, I cannot fathom anything otherwise. These two companies are so big. Can you imagine Air Canada being on strike for 3 weeks on the international level? This is going to be a scandal. Of course, the government has to do everything they can to shut everybody up and bring everything or everybody back to work. I understand the position of the government. When it comes to the union, I get it, even if the union ended up doing a dick move with Air Canada by declaring strike right in the middle of peak time. But I understand that they have to defend their members, and I see their position as to why they are being pissed off at the government always voting special laws and bringing them back to work, removing their capacity they have to negotiate. And both entities, in the case of Air Canada, ended up apologizing to Canadians, saying, we are sorry, Air Canada, we're so sorry, it's beyond our control. And the union is like, we're sorry to Canadian, but we have to go and fight for our rights, right? So whose fault is that then? Is there anybody that could be blamed for all this? And my answer is, I blame the government of Canada itself, because when it comes to Air Canada is not necessarily speaking a monopoly. It's not government owned. It is a public company, meaning that it is on the Toronto stock market. You can buy Air Canada shares. However, and the reason as to why I'm going to blame the federal government, and this is that Canada, Transport Canada probably, there's some super heavy legislation that are basically making any kind of national competition to Air Canada forfeit and completely out of the question. So in other words, Air Canada is literally being put on top because there's absolutely no other company that is capable of giving it a sense of competition. And because there is no competition, prices are always going up year after year after year after year. And the government in this, why would they change something like this? I ended up asking AI, give me a sheer idea of fees and taxes that the government of Canada is taking back into Ottawa's pocket on every single freaking airplane ticket. And according to AI, I'm not going to go into details, but if you want to do it, I welcome you guys to try. It's about 35 to 40% of an airplane ticket is taxes and government fees. So why would the government try to do anything but to get more competition? Because if you get more competition, prices are going to go down, right? The permits, the rules and regulation in Canada are so ridiculous. For example, it is illegal for other companies, let's say a British Airlines, American Airlines, to do what we call some internal or inward traffic in Canada. So you cannot have an American airplane in Vancouver taking off, going to Montreal, take all Canadians from Vancouver, leaving them to Montreal, then grab another bunch of travelers and go back to America. This they cannot do. They can just come and go, but they cannot do internal. So this is illegal for them to do. So it's only Air Canada or WestJet perhaps, but Air Canada is kind of the biggest player who can actually do something like this. So let's say that the Americans are like, okay, fair enough, we are going to create a Canadian branch of American Airlines. You can do that, however, that brand new entity must be Canadian owned by a 51% share. But this is so costly that it's never going to happen. So obviously, no companies are doing something like this. So you are creating a void, and Air Canada is naturally filling it. So if you add a second problem to that, a union of workers representing all of the workers, mechanic and all the pilots and all of that sort of stuff, of course, every single time that there is a conflict, the entire population is being held hostage. Why? Because you have one company, and then the union is pretty damn aware of that. So both parties, government and unions, are kind of tilting power left and right, and they're all abusing this beautiful kind of dichotomy at the top. And who are the biggest losers? We are the biggest losers. And there's nothing else we can do, because the way that the Canadian market is and the lack of international competition is creating this kind of jelly stuck up situation where we just have to pay. And if you are going to open up the market, and if both Air Canada and Canada Post are not able to survive because, let's say, you open the market to some of the US airplane carrier, then I'm sorry, but if you're not able to please your customer and to offer good quality service as a reasonable price, then you need to disappear. Because the real question that I have for you guys, how long are we Canadians are going to support a broken system like this? How long that we, the suckers, are going to pay for such a system? Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.